a second. We're going to take the techniques that were just used to get the person to say anything we wanted them to say, and we're going to use those techniques to try to get to the truth. It's
some of which.
But that's part of the. I think that's part of the reason why they were doing that. I think a lot of people who were doing the torture understood that they're not going to get any truth out of this. I think that, you know, I've heard that before about the North Korea technique and what it yielded, and they had to have known that. And so to me, that's kind of like, you know, really, what is the purpose of this torture? Is it to get intelligence, or was it really just because we were so angry? Because the people doing the torture were so angry.
There's a perfect example of how that then rebounded on us, where one of the people who, they obtained a claim from someone saying that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction from torture, as I understand it.
Oh yeah, that's verified. That we got into the Iraq War because somebody who had been tortured said that there was weapons of mass destruction. We relied on it, and it was wrong.
Talk about a boomerang. Talk about torture. You know, doing
that's not
the worst.
Myth, that's reality.
Worst possible thing for the U.S. It got us into, or it helped get us into a disastrous war that cost millions of, trillions of dollars, killed thousands of people. That's what torture gets, or that's one of the things that torture gets.
Yeah. What I think is so interesting, I did see Zero Dark 30, and it's a good narrative, and people are starved for narratives, and the torture program has been in the news, but that's not catering to the masses that are going to see these Hollywood films. And of course there are nuances and things that people are just taking for face value and not reading into things and not questioning things, but it's a good narrative. And let's say it did work. Well, why did it work? Well, probably because who knows what it is, but there are all these deeper psychological issues and consequences, and for me, what's hard is that we don't have the narrative of what happened. That's easy to grasp, right? It's maybe sitting in the 6,000-page document, and so that this video was a start to that. I think it's immoral. I completely agree with I think it was the Geneva Convention, but so for me, yes, it's wrong, but I think that it's important to get at, well, what happened, and so that you can kind of start to pick apart all the intricacies. But is that going to happen? And I'm really curious as to your thoughts on the direction moving forward and what that might look like, because it's a catch-22. If this is released, then the CIA is going to be held accountable, and I just don't think that's ever going to happen. So I'm just really curious about the next narrative.
I agree with you. The movie is a very strong story. It's a very compelling movie. If you get past the story, if you just go with this Jessica Chastain and what she's doing and her commitment to the work. It's why we think it's critical to get the Senate Intelligence Committee report out there, because it's the hope that we have that the fullest story possible is going to be told of the facts. The people will know how many people, we murdered people under torture. Some human rights groups say that there's at least 10 or 11 people who died as a result of the torture. We know there were for sure a couple. We've got those pictures. But we need to know how many people we killed who were tortured. We need to know how many people who did the torture, what are they like now? How did they feel? What happened? A very personal story was told to me by a Mormon who was in the military, and he's now going around speaking against torture, who was in the military with a fellow Mormon, a young woman, who was, her name was Elise, and he said I should never forget her name because he's trying to remember her memory. And she was a young, very gung-ho military person, and in Iraq she was asked to go into what they call the pit, I guess it was, and sexually harass Muslim men, and talk about their private parts and do all sorts of things. And she couldn't do it. She said, I can't do that. But she was so torn by the conflict of not being able to serve her military order. And as she said, sexuality for Mormons is a religious thing. I can't go and make fun of it. And her religious obligation, so she committed suicide. She's one of the people who actually committed suicide because she couldn't carry out the military request. The report, hopefully, talks about what happens to the people who we ordered to commit these acts, as well as the people who we committed the acts on. And I hope it also includes, I'm expecting it to have a discussion of the reaction of the Arab community, and if there's proof of how many people were actually brought into terrorism because of what they learned about in terms of the torture, so that it's a complete picture of what we did. So that's our best hope. There won't be, right now there is not going to be criminal prosecution. It's against the law. Whoever committed the crimes whoever committed torture broke the law. But that, so far, it doesn't look like there's going to be criminal prosecution. The only thing that can happen is, in other countries where there are gross human rights violations, it can take 40, 50 years before a country comes around to acknowledging and accepting what they did. No country is supposed to get by with torture with impunity, without criminal prosecution. You're not supposed to be able to do that. So that's a heavy load for the United States to have to come to grips with it. There's one other thing that's happening I want to tell you about, and that's there's a privately sponsored group, bipartisan group of distinguished political and former government officials who are coming out with a report in April, who spent their time looking at every single report that's out there and talking to everybody that they can. They didn't have subpoena power, but to try to piece together the facts about the torture program. And they're supposed to be coming out in late April with a report. So that's another option, another opportunity to get the facts.
Didn't Interpol put out some warrants for some of the Bush administration so that they cannot travel to certain European countries without risking arrest?
That's true. It's Spain has,
To Spain?
a judge in Spain has.
But he's since been kicked off the bench, though.
Yeah, yes, but it is the challenge for any Bush administration official who's been involved in this to go to a European country. Yes.
This is awkward, but can we move forward without acknowledging our past involvements in at least training torturers? I was one of those wackos in the 80s in Ann Arbor who was trying to get Carl Levin not to support the Contras, not to bomb civilians in El Salvador, and there were just a whole slew of atrocities that occurred during that period. Nobody cared, and the people who spoke out were wackos. And I don't know when you worked for Carl Levin. I just know when he was a congressman, he was on the wrong side.
He was never a House member. He was only a
Oh,
senator.
senator. Okay, but in the 80s, he was on the wrong side.
I'm happy to acknowledge that. He
Are you?
may have been
Okay,
on the
I
wrong
just-
side.
Okay.
I followed the
didn't
El
know whether to
Salvador
say that.
situation very closely also, and it was a travesty. What
Yeah,
about everything
okay,
in El
well,
Salvador?
But the question is, is it better to move on from here trying to
Oh, yes. that's true.
elucidate that
This
kind of
is-
history, or
the
do we
one.
ignore it and just try and work on the present? I'm not sure. Is it better to, bring this
Well-
stuff up, or is it better to just say, okay, forget that, let's work on the present?
We're trying to end all U.S. sponsored torture.